Good evening. Authorities in Baltimore are tonight continuing a desperate search for survivors after a bridge collapsed after it was hit by a container ship. Pictures showed a huge section of the mile-long bridge in the state of Maryland falling into the water within seconds of being struck. And we do have some pictures live from the scene today, and you can see the destruction there, the supports remaining upright. The main structure of the bridge largely collapsed into the water there. Cars of construction workers were shown being thrown into the water. 2 people have been rescued, with one of them in a critical condition. 6 others are still missing. The US President Biden praised the work of rescue services and said it appeared it had been a terrible accident. The vessel sent out a mayday call after losing power. BBC correspondent Romney Weeks.
Dawn over the Patapsco River, but where the centre of the bridge once stood, tangled metal juts out of the depths. A section of the structure now leads to thin air. The container ship that caused the carnage stranded in the middle of the river, part of the wreckage still draped over its deck. It was the dark of night when the Dali left port. On the 1.5-mile span of the Francis Scott Key Bridge above, the headlights of cars flicker seconds before the ship approaches, hits, and then this. The bridge concertinas with breathtaking speed.
The entire Key Bridge in the harbor.
Police radio registers their utter shock.
We can see 1, 2, 3 remaining sections of this bridge. From there on out from land, the bridge has collapsed.
We were also given information at that time that there were likely multiple people on the bridge at the time of the collapse, and that as a result, multiple people were in the water.
A massive search and rescue operation is underway, with helicopters sweeping the river and divers scouring the depths. So far, 2 people have been pulled out alive. There are at least 6 others missing. President Biden expressed the shock of the nation.
Our prayers are with everyone involved in this terrible accident, and all the families, especially those waiting for the news of their loved one right now. I know every minute in that circumstance feels like a lifetime. I just don't know. It's just terrible.
Local residents even half a mile from the collision told me they could feel its impact.
Yes, it felt like an earthquake. My room shook. I was like, wow.
Her grandfather called me and was like, hey, bridge is gone. What do you mean it's gone? It was gone. Just, I came down here without my glasses last night, but seeing it now today, it's truly devastating to look at.
It's a really shocking sight.
I mean, it's been there all my life, you know.
The ship left the port behind me here in the early hours before heading up this stretch of river towards open water and the bridge. The authorities have confirmed that the ship would have been steered through this stretch of river by a local captain, as is normal, who would know the river, the tides, and the positioning of the bridge. In a slowed version of the footage, you can see the lights on the boat go off and black smoke emerge before the collision. Authorities have confirmed this was the moment it suffered a power failure. In 2016, the same ship was involved in an accident in Belgium where it hit the quayside. This port worker has told us the ship had experienced serious issues before it set off.
I was here for 2 days, because it was a 2-day working ship, and those 2 days they were having serious power outages. Like I said, the reefer boxes that we have on it, which is the refrigerated boxes, they were actually tripping the breakers for our mechanics that were keeping the generators running on those while they were trying to fix the ship, and it was just not, they weren't even holding that, they were tripping breakers on that. So they had a severe electrical problem.
The result of its malfunction today, what the mayor of Baltimore has called an unthinkable tragedy, an outcome that everyone had assumed would have been impossible. Romilly Weeks, ITV News, Baltimore.
More analysis on what we know so far. Here's our correspondent, Rachel Younger.
The Francis Scott Key Bridge spans the Patapsco River in Baltimore. That's a city around an hour's drive from Washington, D.C., the American capital. Now, the bridge is just over 1.5 miles long. That's around half the length of the Prince of Wales Bridge, which connects England and Wales, that's slightly longer than the Humber Bridge in Yorkshire. With 4 lanes for vehicles, the Key Bridge, as it's known locally, is an essential route for commuters. Built in the 70s, the steel structure had to be high enough for the large container ships heading in and out of the busy port of Baltimore to travel beneath it. But in the early hours of this morning, disaster struck. It was hit by the Dali, a container ship registered in Singapore but heading to Sri Lanka. Now, the law dictates that every ship leaving Baltimore port must be navigated out by a local pilot, and the ship's owners have confirmed there were 2 on board. This is the route the Dali was taking when its lights suddenly went out, about 4 minutes before hitting the bridge. Now, it's no more than 60 seconds before power is restored. It's likely this is when the ship's emergency generator kicks in. That would supply enough power to control the ship's steering gear and its engines, unless there was some kind of mechanical failure, which might explain the sudden and otherwise inexplicable turn to starboard just before the ship hits the bridge. But there were also questions over how and why the bridge fell so easily. It was held up by a number of concrete pillars, one of which collapsed when the Dali hit it. With nothing else supporting it, the arch fails, and because it's a continuous structure, it takes the bridge with it. Now, modern bridges on busy waterways like this one should have protections in place to keep them safe, like artificial islands embedded around their columns. But built in the 70s, it's likely the Key Bridge wasn't designed with the vast size of today's ships in mind. Modern technology and satellite navigation systems in particular mean collisions of this scale are rare. But in 1980, Florida's Sunshine Skyway Bridge was hit by a freighter in dreadful weather conditions. It collapsed with the loss of 35 lives. The fact that this morning's tragedy was captured on camera will help investigators trying to work out what happened. But it's likely to be months before we know exactly what went wrong with such devastating consequences.
Correspondent Rachel Younger there. Well, now let's go back to Baltimore and Romilly Weeks. Romilly, there are lots of questions, obviously, aren't there, about the seaworthiness of this vessel?
Absolutely, Mary. The revelation that the Dali, still stranded behind me here, was allegedly suffering electrical problems while it was in dock just over here has really shocked locals who are still waiting for news of those missing, and they are questioning why the ship wasn't tested in daylight with support vessels ready, why it headed out in the dead of night. The companies that own and run the ship, Synergy and Maersk, have said they're horrified by what happened and they're following the investigations carefully. We also know that there was a mayday signal sent out from the ship just before the impact. That gave the authorities vital seconds to close the bridge to further traffic, but there were construction workers on the bridge at the time repairing the road surface, and tragically they were among those who didn't have time to get off.
Romilly Weeks in Baltimore. Thank you.
Simon Henderson needs to be stopped. Stop doing what?
ITV News has been on board with the RAF.